For more on this, let's go to Peter Alexander. He's a global food security lecturer at the University of Edinburgh, and he joins us now live from Georgetown in Malaysia. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on the program here today. Now, wheat constitutes the main daily meal for 1.5 billion people worldwide, and most of these people are in developing countries. Yemen, for example, who is already facing the biggest humanitarian catastrophe in the world today.
Yeah, the situation is extremely serious. However, there are a number of facts in your report that I don't think are quite right. That's not to say that food prices aren't going up and that affordability of food, including wheat, isn't, as I say, perhaps even at crisis levels. But to give you some examples, you said in the initial introduction that the majority of wheat is produced in Russia and Ukraine. And then you later went on to say that 29% of wheat was exported from that country, and that was, or 29% of global exports are from Russia and Ukraine combined. But that doesn't mean that 29% of global supply is from Russia and Ukraine, because much, or the vast majority, 3/4 of the wheat is produced and consumed domestically within the same country. So if we look at things just in terms of export numbers, we kind of distort the picture a little bit, and it looks worse than it is. So that's one aspect that I think we need to put this a little bit in perspective. And another is that there are large global stocks of staples, including wheat, and that can buffer the loss of Russia and Ukraine. So in my personal view is there are very serious issues, and they're about affordability for the poorest of society, but they're not directly about shortages. They're about the global price for those commodities increasing, and for those commodities therefore not being affordable. And they're going up not just because of in fact, perhaps not even primarily because of the export restrictions or difficulties in export from the Black Sea, but also because of input costs, fertilizer costs, and so on. So it's a slightly different and more complex picture than I think you painted.
Right.
But that's not at all to say that the situation isn't extremely serious.
Right, and we're seeing various countries like Algeria and India fend off this crisis in one way or another by banning exports of certain goods. But do you think that would be effective in supporting their own countries in the long term?
I think that's another aspect that I think is actually more troubling than the sort of the loss of Ukraine from those exports. As I mentioned just before, fertilizer prices increasing, I think is actually more of a problem. And another one, another bigger issue, is a sort of protectionist strategies that we're already seeing coming out, as you mentioned, in India, to sort of to restrict or to ban exports. And what that does is that fuels the global commodity price spikes, and we've seen that previously in 2007, 8, and 2011. That when countries sort of seek to take these protectionist strategies, and then other countries then sort of copy them, then that really just fuels this sort of snowball effect, if you like, of commodity prices, which as you correctly pointed out in your piece, damages the poorest in society globally, and it's something that we need to look to avoid really at all costs.
So wheat being the leading problem at the moment, and given the war in Ukraine, can countries resort to any alternative? Is there any alternative to wheat that can close that gap we're experiencing right now?
That's a really good question. So wheat, actually, yes, we use it for bread and for many of the sort of foods that we consume, but it's also used as a livestock feed. So I think roughly a third to a half, depending on the country, of wheat is used to feed livestock. And in a sense, that provides us more flexibility. We can choose to feed livestock other cereals, other things, and similarly, we can choose to eat other foods ourselves, and that would, if you like, reduce the strain on the supply of wheat. But the sort of the negative outcome of that is that it broadens the impact of those price spikes. So you would expect to see, and we are seeing that. Substitution between products, both in terms of production and human consumption, and that would sort of dissipate the sort of direct impacts, but also increase prices across across the board. And just to come back to the fertilizer point, if what we're seeing in terms of wheat price is actually driven, at least partially, and I think quite substantially, by fertilizer and input costs to agricultural production, then you would expect to see that pricing increase much more broadly than just commodities that are exported from Ukraine.
All right, very insightful. Peter Alexander, thank you so much for joining us here on TRT World and sharing that information with us.